Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I have been working today and I would have loved to have come to Germany. I thought I would introduce myself first because I'm assuming no one knows who I am. My name's David. I'm half Korean, half English. I was born and raised in London and I work here as well. I'm actually married to a German, half Korean lady. So I visit Germany very often. I started my career as a photographer, specifically like a fashion photographer, and studied at London College of Fashion. And I went through sort of about 10 years of just doing photography, always trying to improve. And then eventually I won some awards in photography, and then I got some free equipment from some sponsors. I started my own studios in London. So this is just some of my photography from a long time ago. And then I started my studios in Wimbledon. Here's the outside. You might know Wimbledon from the tennis, but this is where I work. We're actually in here. I'm actually in the studios right now. And so I went from photography into essentially just servicing the creative industry, doing, set building, post-production, producing in general, like helping everyone to produce the kind of content they want. And kind of then went from a photographer into then being a producer and creative director on different projects. We shoot a lot for British and American GQ and British Vogue, all these YouTube videos of 10 things like keeping my bag and all these kinds of interview formats for these publications. That's the kind of jobs I do for them. And also just advertising. So nearly all of my creative career was spent in advertising. And about 2 or 3 years ago during COVID, when COVID started, I lost all of my work. 1 whole year of work just gone. And then I sold all of my equipment. And then I essentially had nothing to do. And then so I was just locked up in my bedroom all day, just kind of seeing all the crazy stuff happening in the world. And then my father-in-law passed away from COVID. So I actually had to travel to Berlin. And I quarantined in his old apartment for 2 weeks. It was when I was quarantining in his apartment, I found like an 8-minute long YouTube video, which essentially was like a beginner's easy way to just start rendering some simple AI animations. So I, followed this tutorial. I learned how to make some basic kind of animations using what's called VQGAN. And that was the beginning of my sort of AI journey. So I have absolutely no background in coding or developing or any sort of computer languages. I don't know any of them, and I still kind of only know a tiny bit. Definitely not a professional. I still seek some help with that. But I took to the AI medium like a duck to water. And I just, for that 2 weeks that I was quarantined in the apartment, I learned every day for 16 hours a day. And then once I got out, I just continued doing that every day, 12 to 16 hours a day. And now after 2 or 3 years, I managed to sort of close a lot of these skills gaps that maybe a developer might have as an advantage over sort of being able to just use these tools, because Python and all of this stuff, when you just look at it on a computer, can be very intimidating. But it's not so intimidating when you actually understand what it all does. And so I then was, in the early days, this is some of my photography, I was like one of those people that was making dancing videos. So this is my Instagram. So you can see, this is when I used to actually do proper photography work. And then it just slowly transitions into AI work. And then I began making these sorts of very, very early dancing videos that would just go viral on Instagram. And then that helped me kickstart my sort of commercial client base within AI. And from just this one video, actually, Man City Football Club got in touch with me. And so we designed an animation. Oops, I want to play it again. But yeah, so you see, this is really, really early where there was pretty much just no consistency from one frame to the next. And it was the first week where something called a control net came out. And a control net is like a method of mapping an input image. So you can kind of copy the shape or the form or composition within that image. So this was like an experiment with that. And this was used for Manchester City when they won, all three cups like last year. And then it just led on to then, I worked with Standard Chartered Bank. And then this is a 6-minute long video, so I'm not going to play it, but it essentially goes through the history of banking. This is created using a software called Deforum. I'll pause it because we don't. I'll let you explore it in your own time if you're really interested. But this was a 6-minute long animation on the history of banking, commissioned by Standard Chartered Bank, and then Coca-Cola. So essentially, all of last year, I spent a lot of time working with commercial clients, and then essentially, this Coca-Cola project didn't go very well. It was for a festival in Seoul, and 2 days before the festival, a hurricane came through South Korea and blew over the entire stage, and 8 people got crushed by the stage. And then after that, I kind of just decided I'm not going to do this commercial work anymore. I've already done it for 13, 14 years. And then so I started to pursue my own art career within AI. And there was some very, very interesting art movements that were beginning to happen. And is part of the art movement in a collective called The Fellowship. So I've already been keeping an eye on sort of a bunch of different AI artists, and I could see that this really cool movement was happening specifically with the subgenre called post photography. So briefly, post photography subgenre I would describe as being AI renderings that stem from the visual language of photography. And there was a bit of a watershed moment that occurred just over a year ago of this guy called Ray Nisto. He released a body of work that just exploded, and then it created this post-photographic movement. And so I could see this growing and growing. And at the end of last year, I decided, okay, I'm going to stop doing commercial work. I'm going to try and produce my own body of post-photographic sort of AI. And so I sat down for 2 or 3 months, and I produced my first body of work called Morning Calm. So this body of work was my first stills collection that I released as a sort of an artist under my own name. I have spent my whole life producing art for commercial clients and brands. And for me, I really wanted to do something special as my first body of work. And so Morning Calm is kind of like a term that refers to South Korea. As you might have heard of the land of the rising sun as being Japan, Korea is referred to as the land of the morning calm. So with this body of work, I tried to really do a lot of things. Most and foremost, kind of trying to represent sort of Korean culture, at least my memories of Korea, through sort of AI rendering. On top of that, also starting from the point of photography, trying to see how far we can push, the visual language into sort of a new area where like photography has been left behind. And now we are in the new sort of realm of AI post photography. Because a lot of people, when they get their hands on these tools, you know, who probably couldn't do photography before or were not too great at it, suddenly they can create incredible images straight away without having to go through all of the sorts of technical training that maybe a traditional photography student would have to. So nearly every image is like very aesthetic. So we had to think of like, okay, what can we do that AI can do that no other medium can do? So I call it hypermaximalism, where there is just kind of like infinite detail. So the more you go in, the detail just keeps going. And we can keep going and keep going. So about February of this year, there was a trend of upscaling. So upscaling is obviously the process of making an image bigger. Before AI, when we wanted to upscale an image in photography, it would just kind of replicate the pixels left, right, and top and bottom and just stretch the whole image out. But what you're looking at here is what we call latent upscaling. So when we upscale, it's actually creating brand new detail. And so it does this by cutting the image up into tiles. And then we add some more noise onto the tiles, because all of this works through sort of rendering on top of noise. Noise is kind of like the beginning of every single diffusion render. And so we keep adding noise, we upscale the image, then we add more noise, we upscale it again, we add more noise, we upscale it again. And what we end up with after we run that process 4 or 5 times in a row is this sort of high levels of detail. And so for this body of work, I really focused on sort of this upscaling process. And for me, it was really perfect because I am Korean, but I live in London. So I spent a short period of time in Korea. And Korea is a society that I think is developing something of like a hyper culture. So even the culture there, if you go away for just a few months, it's already moved on really quickly. And Korea is this really sort of fast-paced, very busy new society that's in some ways creating new culture all the time. And to some extent, maybe leaving some of the older culture behind. And so for me, this body of work, I to, through imagery, capture that frenetic energy, this constant progress, and this sort of veneer on the outside of it all that makes it look very good and very aesthetic. So this is essentially me kind of like exploring my sorts of Korean heritage through like AI. It's very, very common with like a lot of artists when they produce a body of work, a lot of people's genesis work is always to do with like their identity and where they come from. So this was kind of my genesis collection to try to put some kind of visual language to my version of my identity. And so this collection is 100 pieces, and just entirely sort of themed on Korean culture. So one thing I noticed while I was producing this body of work is that the stable diffusion models that I was using were very good at Chinese and Japanese imagery and motifs, but it couldn't do Korean culture very well. So even if I typed Korean words in and very specifically Korean locations, it would still come up with like some quite Chinese and Japanese looking images, which to, a Korean, they would be able to notice, or a Japanese local, they would be able to notice. I'm not sure how much like sort of the Western gaze would notice the difference between Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, but I could see it. And so that moved me onto what I'm working on now, So this is Morning Calm. We finished this about a month ago, very bright and colorful. And now we kind of seeing that gap in the data, noticing that it didn't really have the sort of niche. I'll bring it back. There were some gaps in the sort of data sets. And so we began the process of buying and scanning 35 millimeter film from all around the world, and began training our own model that is essentially got all of that sort of rich data and like sort of the arbitrary details that that are kind of forgotten in sort of written or spoken history. This is the Korean War in the 1950s. This is US soldiers going off to just leaving on the ship. Then we got, you can see here on the left, we've literally been collecting stuff from Switzerland. This is a place called Brighton in England. It's an old fair from, I think it was the 1980s. And so we scan it all. We train an AI model on it, and then we blend them into something that looks like this. So we began kind of like the process of filling in these cultural gaps. I started specifically with Korea, but my interest then sort of expanded out into all the sort of primary cultures that I have experienced. So this is London. This is actually an image of Piccadilly Circus mixed with the Brighton images that I just showed you. So this is like a final output. This is like some NASA images that we managed to get hold of, mixed with the New York skylines. And so now we're kind of getting to this place where this post-photographic genre that we've been working on is starting to cross over more with real photography. So there's this sort of real authenticity now that the body of work is starting to stem from. And so this is kind of where we're going. So starting from Morning Calm, where we're trying to look at taking it beyond photography to this new place where photography can't possibly achieve these results, we're now kind of trying to figure out how we can cross it back over into photography in a meaningful way. Because one of the main problems that I kind of experience with this AI practice is this kind of lack of authenticity that I think a lot of people might also, you hear all kinds of arguments for and against, and that's kind of like one of the key arguments that people use it against is, it's lost its humanity and things like this, which I don't really believe it's entirely true, but I think the work does need to be done to bridge these things into the genres of AI, because AI is so brand new and it's only a few, text image AI is so new that the genres don't even really exist right now. So I'm focused entirely on the genre of post photography, and so is over here, and together and with the rest of the artists, hopefully kind of do the work to define this genre and help build it and get it in front of other people. So this just goes forever. These are old buses that's mixed with English gardens. I never realized how much English people just absolutely love their gardens until I started looking through, other people's 35 millimeter film. And so this is all procured through, when people pass away, they sell all of their estate and buying it on eBay and going to thrift shops. So it's taken a lot of time collecting all this work and scanning it and then cleaning everything, creating the outputs. But just to kind of summarize, though, my sentiment is I think we're entering into something of a renaissance in the art world, and these AI tools are more the last medium to come out that was anywhere near as powerful as these AI tools is probably the camera. And we can see how much impact the camera has had on, not just, entertainment culture, but it's used to look into space. It's used to look into people's bodies, for medicine. And so now we have this new medium called, AI. And all the arguments that are being had around AI right now have happened many times before, when Impressionism first came along, when the camera first came along, and, the same arguments are being repeated again right now. And it's a good thing, people should be discussing these tools because they are super powerful. But ultimately, it's going to cause a huge cultural explosion with everyone being able to produce anything that they want when the frame rates start to go higher. Right now, the live rendering rates are about 16 frames per second, but once it goes by next year, should be much higher. And then we're getting into the space of generative movies, generative gaming, entire new content types that we've never even seen before. And, I think at this point, we probably can't really imagine. But I'm absolutely certain it's all going to be coming. And for me, in my practice, I've never had, so much sort of satisfaction from my work. AI personally has given me this new huge amount of creative energy that I probably only experienced when I was starting photography about 10 to 14 years ago. So I definitely have felt personally like a huge reinvigoration with all these new tools. So yeah, I mean, that's my body of work and that's what I've been working on. I hope you like it. I would like to leave you with some advice on how to get started. Everything is on YouTube. If you want to learn how to get started, there are tons of fantastic educators on YouTube, and they're all sorts of 5, 10, 15 minute, 2-hour long tutorials on anything you want to learn. So that's the best way to start. Then if you have any problems, the communities, they all live in Discord. So get yourself a Discord account, find the communities that have the information that you need to sort of get yourself past these blocks that you will 100% experience if you choose to start learning these tools, and get yourself in those communities. They always help everyone. Thirdly, essentially like the heart of a lot of AI art is prompt work. So you can be really technical and, do all the parameters, but if you're bad at prompting, you're not going to make any good images. So to learn how to prompt well very quickly, I suggest going to Midjourney, and on the website, it's got a list of every single person's renders, and underneath it's got the prompts that they use to make it. By going to these sorts of channels where it's all public, you can accelerate your prompting sort of learning by weeks and weeks and weeks. You could do sort of 3 weeks of learning in just one day by sitting in these channels and just seeing the results that other people are getting, and then trying it yourself and mixing it with other things. So I hope those 3 tips can help anyone who's interested in actually getting started in this. The train hasn't left the station. It's still kind of empty. There are not many people practicing, AI art, at least in a meaningful way. There's a lot of people trying the tools out, but there aren't too many people who've really picked it up as a as a practice and doing the work to really develop this genre, because people always think of how does AI relate backwards to photography? How does it relate backwards to filmmaking? How can I use this in my workflows for making my adverts? But I would encourage you to flip that idea, or that sort of, I would advise you to flip that back around and ask the question of, okay, we're starting from photography. How can we go to a place that only AI can produce? And that is when things get really, really interesting, I think. And there aren't many people doing that kind of work right now. So on that note, I would like to, say thank you for listening to me. And if there are any questions, I would open the floor to questions.